Okay, so this video is looking at the two major types of cell that we find on Earth. And these two major types are prokaryotic and eukaryotic. So prokaryotic literally means before there was a nucleus. So these are the cell types that would have evolved first, a simple plasma membrane with some organic molecules inside, including DNA, but not with a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells literally refers to cells that do have a nucleus, but there are a lot more differences between them, which we'll go through. So part of your learning outcomes here is to be able to compare and contrast those and understand their origins. So prokaryotic cells would have evolved first. These are the simple kinds of cells that we would have seen on Earth billions of years ago, and they're generally considered simpler. Two major domains of life are formed by prokaryotic cells, so that's bacteria and archaea. We don't really talk about archaea that much. It's not a very familiar word for people, but they are also this type. In general, we refer to bacterial cells as being prokaryotic, and mostly they're synonymous terms, meaning the same kind of thing. Whereas eukaryotic cells would have evolved later by a process of endosymbiosis, and if you're not sure about that, you can check the endosymbiosis video. It goes through that process. But eukaryotic cells are the third domain of life. There can be single-celled organisms like protists and some fungi, or multicellular organisms like other types of fungi, animals, and plants. And as you can see, a lot more complex structure. So as well as having a nucleus, the other things that eukaryotic cells have is a whole lot of membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and chloroplasts, smooth ER, rough ER, Golgi apparatus, all of those things you might see here. So this table here summarizes some of those main differences. So we can see that in terms of DNA, prokaryotic have naked DNA in a circular loop, and it doesn't have introns. We'll talk about that later, don't worry about that yet. Whereas the DNA in eukaryotes is bound to a protein, as in linear chromosomes. So whereas in bacterial cells you have a circular loop, the linear chromosomes have a start and an end, but then there's multiple chromosomes in eukaryotic cells. Other things to look at there is the presence of organelles. So no nucleus, whereas has a nucleus, and membrane-bound organelles in the eukaryotic cells. There's also a difference in the type of ribosomes they have. And then here we have their type of reproduction. So prokaryotic cells divide in a way that's called binary fission. That basically means splitting in two, and that's another video we're going to talk about later, binary fission. Whereas eukaryotic cells can divide by processes of mitosis and meiosis. Again, we talk about that later in the course. Finally, in terms of size, we can look at this scale diagram here. Prokaryotic cells, fairly small. This is like a rod-shaped bacterial cell. Eukaryotic cells, usually much larger. So 1 to 5 micrometers. So that mu is a Greek letter that means a millionth of a meter. So a millimeter is a thousandth of a meter, and mu is a millionth of a meter. So 1 to 5 micrometers, whereas this is 10 to 100. And just for scale as well, viruses are even smaller than prokaryotic cells. Now, viruses are not considered living, they're non-cellular, but they are organic entities that can, with the help of other cells, reproduce. So viruses are not considered cells and not considered life. Prokaryotic cells are the smallest, simplest, and eukaryotic are larger and more complex generally. Of course, there are always exceptions. This is covered in Chapter 7, and there's some more information you can find at that web link there.